So Department spokesperson Singabakho Nxumalo is now with us to talk to us a little bit more. Very good evening to you, and thank you so much for joining us, Bangako. So let's talk about when did the former president file the application, and typically how long does it take to process it? If you could unmute yourself, Singabakho. That's better, thank you.
I have unmuted, I'm sorry for that. As a department, we have confirmed that the former president, Mr. Jacob Zuma, has made an application to temporarily leave a correctional center on compassionate grounds. That particular application is being processed, and at the right time, a decision will be made.
So, as I asked, what does it take to process it? Is there a typical number of days? These things are typically unforeseen. What processes would you undertake to verify that this is indeed something that qualifies for compassionate leave?
There is no time frame to it. What guides us, though, is to say in that application, an inmate has to state what is the activity that one ought to attend to, and when is it taking place in terms of the date and also the time frame, so that if that application is granted, you are able to work out to say, okay, we'll therefore transport this inmate on this particular date from this time so that he or she is at home before the actual start of that particular activity, and the inmate to be brought back into a facility. Because you need to remember that in as much as the inmate will be temporarily out of a facility, that person remains an offender who must be in our care at all times.
Okay, so let's talk about that. You've been quoted as saying there are a number of variables that still need to be considered, like the former president's prison term, the classification of whether or not he is a low, medium or high-risk inmate. Why does this matter?
What we're looking at here is to say, what is the likelihood that this particular inmate may, one, attempt to escape or become very challenging in terms of control when out there, and also responding to instructions. Then you need to cover that particular aspect. But what is a layer that often is not commented about is to say compassionate leave or any leave to temporarily leave a facility is part of privileges that inmates earn when they're in our care. So if, let's say, you're an inmate whose behavior is not according to the line, you don't take kindly to instructions, and you're problematic in terms of management, unfortunately, you cannot accrue this particular privilege. Hence, then it's important that you ought to then go through that particular process to say, as this person is with us inside, is this person liable to benefit from this particular privilege? And from there to say, okay, what is it that we're dealing with here? So this person is applying to go out on compassionate grounds. What is it that this person wants to attend? If, let's say, it's a bereavement, within the family, is this person, a family member, or is a distant, relative? Because if you're a distant relative, unfortunately, we cannot, approve that. But if you are a direct family member, therefore, we need to consider that. But then other issues then is to say, okay, once this person is out there, can we then control this person? Can we monitor this person? And help us to then ensure that this person is brought back to our facility, safe and secure.
I'd imagine that is on a case-by-case basis. So in this case, we're speaking about former President Jacob Zuma. We know the complexities or the challenges that we have seen before he arrived at the Escort Correctional Facility. Without prejudging, without prejudicing this outcome, could that influence the decision to actually say, as you say, if there were difficulties experienced before his handing himself over, the likelihood of that occurring, could that dissuade those who make the final decision on his application for compassionate leave?
What is cardinal here is that inmates are equal and must be treated the same, irrespective of what could be their standout. Their status out there in terms of how do people perceive them and place them in whatever hierarchy that they may determine. Therefore, if, let's say, there are other elements that you picked up. But those elements are not designed by the inmate. Therefore, you cannot use those to disadvantage that particular inmate. As a state, you ought to have a mechanism in place in terms of how best can you manage that particular situation. If not, what else can you then employ in terms of dealing with that? But all that goes into the security there to build around that. Hence, then, when you take that particular decision, you're able to say, okay, it's a situation that we can manage, and it's something that must be then afforded to an inmate because he deserves it, and there are no grounds for one to then disapprove this particular application. Therefore, it's all about then the security apparatus to say how to go about doing that.
Okay.
But then, as a state, you ought to provide those means.
So I'm glad you clarified that it would have to be as a result of action taken by the individual. So you're not going to base your decision on what others have done. You also talk about a security plan that would have to be developed if the application were approved. Talk to me about what security plan would be devised if the inmate is going to be released for a number of hours, and would that be different if there is an application granted to be released for several days?
You may find it interesting that in my years in Correctional Services, I have not seen the security plan, but it's there. You know why? It's managed by the responsible authorities, those who deal strictly with security, and other people are not supposed to be part of that because it details every step of the way from when an inmate, let's say someone is being taken to an outside hospital facility, there must be a security plan. If someone is going to court, there must be a security plan. It details everything, the threats that they may have identified, how to troubleshoot certain things. Unfortunately, we're not privy to that because if we were to divulge such information, that will even compromise, the security that you ought to put around that particular individual. But then what is key here is that each time an inmate has to leave a facility, there must be a security plan.
Thank you so much for speaking to us and clarifying those aspects of the process that will be undertaken with regards to your request for compassionate leave. Department spokesperson Singabakho Nxumalo